I still remember the soft sound of the ocean outside the balcony of our honeymoon villa in Miami, America. The house sat right on the edge of the sand, a bright white two-story beach home with tall glass windows, long curtains that swayed with the breeze, and a wooden deck that stretched toward the water. The moonlight spilled across the waves like silver paint. It should have been the most peaceful night of my life. I had married Lucas Hale only 2 days earlier, and everyone had told me I was lucky. He was handsome, polite, and always spoke about our future like it was already written in gold. I believed he loved me. I believed all of it. We spent the day exploring the shoreline, laughing as the tide chased our feet, eating lobster at a small restaurant that sat close enough to the ocean that waves sometimes touched the bottom of the deck. I had felt warm and hopeful, imagining long years together in my small brick house in Boston, or maybe even buying a new place someday in Europe if we ever decided to travel or work there. I thought our life was beginning in the best possible way. That hope makes what came next feel even heavier. It must have been around 2 in the morning when everything changed. I woke up thirsty. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the moon coming through the curtains. Lucas was beside me, or at least I thought he was. I reached out, expecting to touch his shoulder, but the space was empty and cold. I sat up slowly, confused, brushing my hair out of my face. I assumed he might have gone to the kitchen for water or to take a call from one of his clients. He often said he had international work, the kind that required him to speak with people in Europe at strange hours. I stood up and slipped my feet into the soft slippers the villa provided. As I reached for the glass of water on the table, I paused. At first, I thought I heard the wind moving through the palm trees outside. It was soft, almost gentle. But then I heard another sound, a low whisper that was too controlled, too careful, too human. My heart gave a small jolt as I froze in place, listening harder. The whisper grew slightly clearer, followed by a quiet laugh. Definitely not the wind. Slowly, I walked toward the sliding glass door that led to the balcony. I did not open it. Instead, I pressed myself close enough to hear without being seen. My body felt tense and shaky all at once, as if every part of me already knew something was wrong but did not want to believe it. Then I heard Lucas. His voice was unmistakable, calm, steady, almost excited.
"It is only one more day," he said.
"After that, everything will be ours. Once she signs the property papers, we will both be rich." My blood turned cold. Every piece of warmth I had felt earlier drained out of me in an instant. I did not move. I did not breathe. I could only stare at the curtains as if they held the answer to what I should do next. Everything will be ours. Both of us will be rich.
He was not talking about me. He was talking about taking from me.
My house in Boston, which I inherited from my grandfather, the one worth about $900,000. My land in Colorado is valued at over $1.2 million. My savings that I had worked years to build. He had asked me several times before the wedding if I wanted to put both properties under joint ownership, but I always delayed the decision. Something had made me cautious even then.
Now I understand why.
My hands began to shake as I pulled my phone from the nightstand. I stepped away from the door, afraid he would hear my breathing or sense my presence. My stomach twisted painfully as I tried to make sense of what I had just heard. This was my husband, the man who had kissed me earlier that evening and told me I was the best part of his life. I forced myself to take a slow breath. The next few seconds felt unreal, like I had stepped outside my own body. I opened my phone and dialed the police. My fingers trembled so much that I pressed the wrong number at first. The second time the call connected. Quietly, I told the operator that something was terribly wrong. I explained only what I needed to, that I suspected a planned fraud, that I believed my husband was working with someone else, and that I felt unsafe. She assured me officers were on the way. She told me to stay inside and not confront him. I ended the call and pressed the phone against my chest just to calm my heartbeat. I could still hear Lucas whispering outside. There was another voice too, female, faint but present. I knew who it had to be. Emily Carter. The woman he always said was just a coworker, nothing more. I had seen the way she looked at him during our wedding reception in New York. I had tried to ignore it. Now the truth stood clear in front of me. I moved back to the bed and sat down. My legs felt too weak to hold me. I kept replaying his words in my mind. One more day. Everything will be ours. Sign the property papers. Together, we will be rich. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I felt hurt, angry, terrified, and strangely calm all at the same time. The calm was the most surprising part. It felt like survival, like strength I did not know I had. The police would be here soon. I only had to wait. And in that quiet, heavy moment, I knew my marriage had ended before it even truly began. The police arrived faster than I expected. Maybe it was because the roads along the Miami coastline were quiet at that hour, or maybe it was because the operator had sensed something urgent in my voice. Either way, the red and blue lights flashed across the white walls of the villa, painting everything in sharp colors that made my heart race even more. The soft whispering outside stopped the moment the police car pulled into the driveway. I remained inside the bedroom for a moment, breathing slowly, steadying myself. When I finally walked toward the living room, I saw Lucas standing on the deck, stiff as stone, while two officers questioned him. Their flashlights cut across the wooden boards and the palm trees that swayed behind him. The ocean, once calming, now felt like a backdrop to a nightmare I never imagined living through. One of the officers motioned for me to come forward. My hands shook, but my voice did not. I told them everything I heard. I described how Lucas whispered about taking my properties, how he spoke about forcing me to sign documents transferring everything into his name, how he said he and someone else would be rich once I was pushed into a corner. I told them about the other voice on the deck, a woman's voice, and how it matched the tone of someone I knew far too well. The officers asked Lucas directly if someone else was nearby. He denied it immediately. He said he was just clearing his head and making a call about business. But his voice cracked on the last word, and the officers noticed. Then his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name neither of us could ignore. Emily Carter. The officer closest to him reached for the phone, but Lucas pulled back instinctively, which was a mistake. In a matter of seconds, the officers moved closer and took control of the situation. Lucas stepped backward, cornered by two trained professionals who knew exactly how to handle someone who had something to hide. The phone continued buzzing. The same name. The same person who had always stayed too close to Lucas, even before our wedding. One officer asked where she was. Lucas looked toward the palm trees but said nothing. His silence was enough. They searched the immediate area with their flashlights. Within moments, a silver car parked behind a row of palms reflected just enough light to expose itself. The officers walked toward it, announcing themselves loudly and clearly. I stood on the deck, my hands clasped so tightly they hurt. I could feel the sweat gathering at my palms, the cool Florida air doing nothing to calm the heat of fear rising inside me. The ocean waves crashed lightly in the distance, a cruel contrast to the storm building in my chest. Then I heard it, a woman's sharp, frustrated voice. Emily was pulled from the driver's seat, her face twisted with anger, not embarrassment. Two officers held her arms while she shouted at them, insisting she did nothing wrong. But the moment her eyes found me standing under the villa lights, her expression changed. The anger sharpened, turning into something poisonous. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "Everything." I did not answer. There was nothing to say. She had tried to steal my life, my future, my home, my money. She had planned to tear apart my stability with a man I believed loved me. Lucas stepped forward as much as the officers allowed. He tried to speak to me, his voice rushing out like he was afraid time was slipping away. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. "It is not what you think. I can explain everything in court." His words were empty. They floated in the air without weight or truth. I stood still, staring at him, feeling a strange mix of heartbreak and relief. Relief that I had found out before it was too late. Heartbreak that the man I thought I married was standing there in handcuffs, exposed for who he truly was. The officers separated them, placing Emily in the back of the patrol car first. She kicked the seat and muttered under her breath, furious that her plan had fallen apart. Lucas was next. He kept looking at me, as if hoping I would defend him, as if I would pretend none of this had happened. I did not move. I did not offer comfort. I simply watched as both of them were taken away, swallowed by flashing lights that soon faded down the road. The villa that had felt warm and romantic earlier now felt cold, sharp, and hollow. I walked back inside slowly, almost cautiously, as if the house itself had been tainted by their presence. I sat on the couch, hugging my knees to my chest. The air felt different, heavier, like every shadow had grown darker. The sound of the ocean outside kept moving, calm and steady, as if nothing had happened. But inside my chest, everything had cracked open. I stared at the glass sliding door, wondering how long Lucas had planned this, wondering if he ever loved me at all, or if this had always been the endgame for him and Emily. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Crying felt too fragile for what I had just survived. For the next hour, I stayed awake, replaying every moment of our relationship, every compliment, every promise, every smile he had ever given me. All of them are stained now. All of them are poisoned by greed. When the silence settled again, the only thought left was simple and painful. My marriage had died the same night it was supposed to begin. 2 months after that terrible night in Miami, I walked into the courthouse in New York with a feeling I still cannot fully describe. It was a strange blend of fear, exhaustion, determination, and something close to grief. The courthouse was an old stone building with tall windows that let in narrow lines of morning light. The steps creaked slightly under my shoes, and the hall smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. I had been there once before with my lawyer, but this day felt heavier. This day was the trial. My heart pounded harder the closer I got to the courtroom. Inside, people sat quietly on long wooden benches, waiting for their cases. Some whispered nervously. Others stared ahead with blank expressions. I took a seat in the front row, clasping my hands together so tightly that my fingers turned pale. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. After several minutes, the door in the back opened. Lucas and Emily were brought in together, both wearing gray uniforms, their hands cuffed. Lucas looked thinner than before, his hair slightly messy, but his expression was the same smooth mask I had seen the last night we were together. Emily kept her eyes down, her jaw set as if she was holding back anger rather than shame. Seeing them like that sent a cold shiver down my spine. These were the people who once planned to take everything from me. The judge entered the room, and everyone stood. His presence was firm but calm, a man who had spent decades listening to lies, truths, and everything in between. When he sat down, the room quieted to the point where even breathing sounded loud. The judge looked over the file for a moment before lifting his eyes toward me. "Please step forward and speak," he said. My legs felt unsteady as I stood, but I walked to the front of the room. I told myself not to look at Lucas, not to search for signs of guilt or remorse that I knew would never come. Instead, I focused on the judge, on the truth, on the reason I was standing there. I explained everything. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I continued. I told the court how Lucas had rushed the wedding, telling me it was because love should not wait. I told them how he encouraged me to put my Boston house under both our names and how he subtly pressured me to transfer my Colorado land, valued at over $1 million, into joint ownership. I told them how he acted kind and loving in front of others, but how he became distant whenever I hesitated about the paperwork. I described the night in Miami, the whispers on the deck, the voice of another woman, the words that broke my world. I repeated exactly what I heard. It is only one more day. After that, everything will be ours. Once she signs the property papers, we will both be rich. As I spoke, the courtroom remained silent. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. My chest tightened as I remembered standing in that dark villa, listening to the truth, realizing I had married a man who saw my life as a prize he wanted to steal. When I finished, the officers were invited to present their evidence. They played the recording taken the night of the arrest. Hearing Lucas's voice echo in the room, saying those same words again, felt like someone pressed a blade to my heart. Emily's voice was faint but recognizable, agreeing with him, encouraging him, laughing softly as they planned how to corner me. I try not to cry, but hearing it again made my stomach twist. I blinked hard, keeping my back straight. Lucas stared straight ahead. Emily kept her eyes on the floor. Their lawyer stood next. He tried to argue that Lucas and Emily had been joking, that the conversation was exaggerated, and that there was no proof they would follow through. He said they were foolish but not dangerous. He said the recording was taken out of context. But no one in the room believed him. Not the jury. Not the judge. Not even the few people sitting in the back were waiting for their cases. The words were too clear. The plan is too detailed. Their deceit is too obvious. After hours of testimony and questioning, the courtroom settled into a stillness that felt almost physical. The judge lifted the sentencing papers, his expression heavy but steady. The room held its breath. Lucas Hale and Emily Carter, he said, you are both found guilty of attempted fraud, conspiracy, and intentional manipulation for financial gain. You attempted to deceive a woman who trusted you deeply. Your actions were calculated and harmful. He paused before continuing. This court orders each of you to pay a very large fine to the victim. You are both sentenced to significant prison terms. The sound of his gavel striking the desk echoed through the room like a thunderclap. A wave of emotion hit me so fast I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. It felt like months of fear, betrayal, confusion, and doubt had finally broken apart.
Lucas looked at me for the first time that day.
His expression was blank, unreadable. Emily glared, her mouth twisted in anger, but her fate was sealed. As the officers escorted them away, I exhaled slowly, realizing I had not taken a full breath in what felt like hours. The weight on my chest loosened little by little. My hands stopped shaking. For the first time since the night everything shattered, I felt a small spark of strength return to me. The truth was out. Justice had spoken. And I knew my life would never be the same again. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the autumn air in New York brushed against my skin like a quiet reminder that the world was still turning, even after everything I had survived. The sky was a soft gray, with thin streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. I stood on the wide stone steps for a long moment, staring at the city around me. Cars moved steadily along the street, people walked with purpose, and leaves drifted gently onto the pavement below. After months of fear, betrayal, and court hearings, this ordinary movement felt almost extraordinary. I felt lighter, but also older, wiser, and more aware of how fragile trust can be. I made my way to a small cafe across the street and sat near the window with a cup of hot coffee. The warmth in my hands felt comforting, grounding. As I watched strangers pass by, I let myself breathe deeply for the first time in months. My life had almost been stolen for money. My marriage had ended before it had a chance to become real. But I had something they could never take. My freedom, my future, my strength. 2 days later, I returned to my home in Boston. The moment I unlocked the front door, a familiar scent wrapped around me. The house was a small brick home with white shutters and a narrow garden that always smelled like rosemary and fresh soil. I had planted that rosemary bush myself when I first inherited the house. It had survived storms, long winters, and years of uncertainty. It felt symbolic somehow. A quiet, living reminder that some things could withstand seasons of hardship and still grow. Inside, the wooden floors creaked under my feet just like they always had. The living room was warm and welcoming, with soft gray walls and shelves filled with books that had traveled with me from place to place. I stood there, taking everything in. This house was mine. It had always been mine. No one could force me out of it. No one could claim it with a signature or a whisper in the night. Over the next week, I allowed myself to rest. I cleaned the house, not because it needed cleaning, but because the act of moving through rooms with intention gave me a sense of control. I opened windows to let in fresh air. I organized my documents, locked them in a safe, and reviewed every financial detail that Lucas had once tried to manipulate. My Colorado land, valued at over $1 million, remained untouched. My savings remained secure. Everything he had wanted to steal was still in my name, protected and safe. I spent evenings on the couch wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea, watching the soft glow of Boston's streetlights reflect through the windows. The quiet was healing. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could hear myself think without fear shadowing every thought. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table writing in my journal, a thought settled into my mind so clearly that it made me pause. I needed distance. I needed a break from America, from the courtroom, from the memories carved too deeply into the walls of my home. Not forever. Just long enough to breathe new air and see something beyond the shadows of the betrayal I had endured. So, I booked a plane ticket to London. It felt impulsive, but it also felt right. A new place, a new rhythm, a chance to reclaim pieces of myself that had been shaken loose. When I arrived in London, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. I rented a small flat near the river, a charming space with tall windows, pale blue curtains, and a tiny kitchen that felt cozy in its simplicity. Every morning, I walked along the Thames, watching the water move calmly under the bridges. The city felt both grand and gentle, a place that held history, but also allowed space for quiet reflection. I spent afternoons in small bookstores, evenings sitting by the river with a warm drink, and nights writing long letters to myself about everything I had learned. About strength, about trust, about how easily a heart can be fooled when kindness is mimicked by greed. One evening, as the lights along the river reflected in the dark water, shimmering like threads of gold, I felt a shift inside me. A sense of clarity I had not felt since before the wedding. I realized I was no longer replaying Lucas's voice in my head. I was no longer hearing Emily's words. I was no longer stuck in the moment where my life had tilted sideways. I was healing. I told myself that night that I would rebuild my life slowly, carefully, and with courage. I had survived something that could have broken me completely, yet here I was, sitting by a river in a city across the ocean, with my future still ahead of me. After 3 weeks in London, I returned to Boston stronger, calmer, and more certain of who I was. My house welcomed me like an old friend. I spent the next few months focusing on my work, reconnecting with friends, and choosing to protect my peace with more intention than ever. I learned to trust myself again, to read people more clearly, and to never ignore the quiet warnings that life gives us. My properties were mine. My money was safe. My voice had been heard. My story had been seen. Their dream of becoming rich with my assets had died the same night their lies were exposed. They had stolen nothing from me except a few months of hope, and even that hope eventually returned in a stronger form. And standing in my quiet Boston home, with the scent of rosemary drifting through the garden and sunlight touching the windows, I realized something profound. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace.